Hey, this is Brendan from Comic Con. Today we're talking with Nottingham writer David Hazan, and we're going to be talking about some of the new things that he's got coming up. The Mad Cave Talent Search is happening right now, and Nottingham is one of the properties that the people who are submitting their work for that contest are going to be able to work on in the world of Nottingham. That's kind of exciting. Kosher Mafia is coming up in August, so we're going to be talking about that. But for the first time ever, usually I wake David up in the middle of the night because he's on the other side of the planet. But we have scheduled a time when David is actually awake. So please welcome David Hazan. David, how you doing today?
Hello. I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. So let's talk about Nottingham. You just blazed onto the comic scene with this amazing, like historical fiction slash horror slash just amazing genre crossing piece called Nottingham, and it's coming to an end. You are in the final arc. How does that make you feel, sir?
Well, I definitely submitted that last script and had that feeling of just kind of like numbness. Um, it's been sort of a 5-year endeavor, really, and it coming to an end is a lot. I don't think I anticipated how I would feel at the end, but yeah, it's 15 issues plus um Tales, which was 6 issues plus all those sort of shorter things like the free comic book day stuff and Tales from the Cave. It's like there's a good 500 pages of Nottingham out there, so it's incredibly gratifying, but also terrifying to even imagine the question of what's next.
Well, and it's really cool too because I believe that Nottingham is such a strong property that your like brainchild has become part of the fabric of Mad Cave Studios. Like it's one of the things that people associate with the publisher, and it's not done because you've got Tales of Nottingham that's going on right now, and then you've kind of hinted a little like cheekily that there's something else coming in the future that you may or may not be involved in and stuff like that. So like the fact that the Mad Cave Talent Search is coming up, and Nottingham is one of the worlds that people can create in to submit their own work to be considered for the talent search in 2024. And then you've got all these spinoffs that are happening and things like that. Like Mad Cave Studios and Nottingham and David Hazan are kind of intrinsically linked at this point.
Well, I should hope so. I mean, there's like so much blood, sweat, and tears in there, and for both me and Shane and Luca and Justin and Mad Cave, but I don't think it's any secret. Mark London has sort of said in interviews that the main story of Nottingham is over, but there will be more coming from that world. Some of it I'm a part of, some of it I'm just watching with glee, which is kind of nice too. I
Mhm.
got that with Tales, and it's nice to watch and see what other people do with the toys in
Mhm.
the toy box, and now I sort of don't have to worry about it interfering with what I'm trying to do, which is great. I can just let them do whatever they want to do, and that really works. That really works for me. And it's nice to see friends get the opportunity to do that, which
Mhm.
is hopefully what's going to happen. So yeah, the sort of the more that people invest in Nottingham, the more that they're going to get out of it, I hope.
Yeah, sure, for
Um,
sure.
and with the talent search, it's kind of the same feeling as that sort of Tales situation where it's kind of nice to give back. And I've sort of tried to be quite as assistive as I can be
Mhm.
on social media. I try to subscribe to the rising tide philosophy. So
Mhm.
um, I'm happy to answer whatever questions that people have. Prefer if they ask them sort of on the thread that I posted rather than
Mhm.
in DMs, because that way everybody gets the benefit of the answer,
Sure.
and I don't have to repeat myself 14 times. Um, so if you are asking for my help, please respect my time, or any of my colleagues, please respect our time, and also don't send us scripts.
Right.
We we
That's a
can't
big one.
we can't read them, so please don't.
Well, and if you send them I mean, just know that if you send them and it accidentally gets read, even if that was something that could have happened online or whatever, they have to tank it because of legal reasons and stuff like that. So if you send in the most fantastic idea and it's something that David was already going to do or that a creator was already going to do and they happen to see it, they can't do it. So if there's cool things that you have that you think are fun or something like that, please just have that little fan moment when you see it happen down the line or something like that. But don't send it in because it jeopardizes it
You're more than
jeopardizes
welcome to
that
submit it
storyline.
to the competition. Just
Yeah. Mhm.
don't send it to my DMs or my inbox, please.
Nice, nice. So that's a great point. Is David is very I know personally that David is very, available on social media and stuff like that. So just yeah, when you're approaching
Be
creators and things
careful
like that,
saying that, Brendan. Be careful saying
there are
that.
places no, I'm saying there are places to reach out to people, and that is at comics conventions at the table. And that is,
Mm.
in different places or something that is in a public thread. But when you start, stalking them at the airport or, when they're trying to get into a cab or they're eating dinner or, DMs and things like that, there's a line and you got to respect that. I mean, when people are being as open as a lot of comics creators are, there is a lot of potential to cross that line and we don't want that to happen. So that's just
Absolutely.
that's just no fun for anyone. Nice. Nice. Cool. So let's talk about Kosher Mafia. So I got to read Kosher Mafia. I was fascinated by it. It's a good looking book. It's got that nice sepia tone to it. It's got a really gritty look with the artwork and things like that. But then I was looking, I was like, this is a real thing. And so I looked it up. The Kosher Mafia is fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
So here's the solicit. It's David Hazan writing. They've got artist Sammy Kivala, I think is what it is. I looked it up, and I'm not great with the pronunciation of that one. Ellie Wright is doing the coloring. Simon Boland, a fantastic letterer, is working on it. The solicit says in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1936, Howard Berkowitz, the bookkeeper for the Jewish mob, finds himself on the wrong end of an enforcer's gun when he tries to spur the Kosher Mafia into action against the rising tide of domestic Nazism in the German American Bund. All of these things are real. The German American Bund and the German American Federation rose up to replace the Friends of New Germany in the United States. They're neo-Nazi groups that are um, they're very present. They're very
Mm.
active in keeping Jewish people down and doing some pretty awful things. So the German
Well,
American
they
Bund
were
is in it.
proto-Nazi groups at the
Mhm.
time, really,
Yeah,
rather than
right.
neo-Nazi,
Oh,
which
sorry. I
is
said neo-Nazi. You're right. You're right. You're right. They were actual Nazis, right? They weren't emulating Nazis. They
yeah,
were actual Nazis. It was like the emergence of the actual Nazi party in the United States.
yeah.
Um, and then just reading about Arnold Rothstein. I'm not sure how to say it. In the late 19th, earliest 20th century, like making this organization and how they were working with the Russian mafia and the Italian mafia and all these different groups that they orchestrated the Black Sox scandal of 1919, the World Series scandal. It's just fascinating stuff. So back to the writer, actually. Let me get off my little fascination thing. Tell me about your story. Like, why this period? Why the Jewish mafia? What does this story mean to you?
Well, I think I had just reread The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay.
Mhm,
Um, and it kind of leapt out to me as sort of being an emotionally resonant period and place.
mhm,
And so I was like, well, given that at its core, at their core, comics are a Jewish medium, um, why not set this quintessentially Jewish story in the place and time where our modern comic book industry was born, where Superman was born.
mm,
So I landed on Cleveland, Ohio in the 30s, and then I did a lot of reading um, about sort of organized crime generally, but also specifically the Kosher Nostra in Cleveland, and also like what the Nazi organizations were doing at the time. So, like you said, organizations like the German American Bund and the organizations that sort of it sprang from, things like the Friends of New Germany and the Silver Shirt Legion. And there's just such a depth of history there. I think part of it is because Middle America was a sort of hub for German migration. Um, it just all kind of fell into place. And I felt like I had found sort of, in some respects, uh, another perfect setting in the same way that Nottingham was sort of a perfect setting for what I was
mhm.
trying to do there. things all sort of lined up, and when they line up like that, you just go for it, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to say like what I read in the first book, but there are these themes that we're very familiar with. We're very familiar with Cosa Nostra, and I love that Kosher Nostra is a play on words that they use to describe the Jewish mafia. Um, but it's one of those things where it just clicks, and you're reading it and you're like, "Oh, that makes sense because of this," and you're bringing in these different elements, and, there is very much the cultural Judaism, there is very much the religious Judaism, and one of the things that I've always found fascinating is how the Italian mafia balances their, like, primarily Catholic beliefs against these horrible things that they're doing, and then you look at these people that are praying in certain ways and doing things in the Jewish tradition, and then also doing these terrible things. And it's one of those things where it's like you look at the balance between the religion of it and the cultural aspects of it, and then like how they justify these terrible things that they do.
Yeah, I think that's really at the core of the book, right? And part of that is this sort of odd couple dynamic between Howard, this sort of like bumbling bookkeeper,
Mhm,
and Ephraim Gold, the enforcer who gets sent to kill him, but something different happens.
mhm.
Um, and I don't want to say too much because it's sort of
Oh, of
the big
course, yeah.
big twist of issue one.
Mhm,
Um, but uh, that sort of moral tension, um, between religion and also the sort of vicissitudes of the migrant experience, in America, I think it's really kind of very fascinating,
mhm,
and um, I really it just creates these beautifully complex people, you know.
mhm,
Um, Whereas, you have to set sort of 14 things up for a character like Everard Blackthorne to be this sort of wildly complicated person, even though,
yeah.
you
Mhm,
know, he's substantially an awful human being.
right.
Um, but you make him sympathetic by putting all these building blocks in place. It's just already there, like all of these uh, mafioso are wonderfully complex and layered. For example, anybody who's seen a mafia movie ever, just sort of the import that's put on family, I think,
Mhm,
uh, is really interesting. Especially given that these are sort of really horrible people,
mhm.
and
Well,
it's
nobody ever thinks that they're the villain in the story, right? Like
no, no, they don't.
everybody always
It's
puts a shiny lacquer on the things that they're doing, and they don't
yeah.
ever see themselves at fault in this horrible thing that's happening.
And I think there's just so much to pull at with these people,
Mhm,
and this kind of, I hope where I thrive, which is, um, messy people doing messy things, and trying to desperately clean up after themselves, I guess.
mhm,
Um,
sure.
and even Howard, to a certain extent, has to really decide how far he's willing to go to achieve what he wants.
Mhm,
And this story is really about him finding that line and sort of threatening to teeter over the edge of it, and what happens if he does. And it's just been such a joy to write. It's been incredibly difficult, probably the most difficult thing I've ever written, because so much of it is so deeply personal, and you
mhm,
know there are bits and pieces of these characters that are rooted in people that I know and people that I'm related to. Nobody criminal, thankfully, but there's so much. In the first issue, Howard sort of recounts what happened to his brothers when they all migrated from just what is now sort of Poland, Ukraine,
mhm.
um, generally Soviet place.
Soviet bloc, yeah,
Yeah. Um,
yeah,
and and that story is really almost directly translated from the story of my great grandfather and his two brothers.
mm,
Um, there's almost nothing there. Um, I was sort of a slight alteration in terms of when it happened.
mhm,
Um, But
Well, and obviously they went to the United States, you're in Australia.
well, fascinatingly, my great grandfather decided to go to New York. Didn't
So you
like the
emigrated
weather
twice?
and ended up didn't well actually 3 times. So um, they went from what is now uh, Belarus,
Okay.
uh, a place called Brest-Litovsk in Belarus,
Mhm,
um, to Wales, which they thought was England when they got off the boat. They thought it was England, so they stayed. Then from Wales, um, my great grandfather's brothers settled there, but he decided that he wasn't happy where he was, so he went
mhm.
to the US, hated it, uh, and so came to Australia instead.
Fair enough. Hey, I mean, you ended up where you're at, and you're in the position that you're in because of all those changes. So,
Yeah,
you mentioned with the Sheriff Blackthorn, and one of the things that I actually thought that was really great about Nottingham was that while he's this horrible person, a lot of his character traits come from a trauma response because he was at the Battle of Yadia, or the massacre of Yadia, I should say. All these different things happened that kind of formed him and made him into the person that he is, and kind of gave him some of the. And it's interesting that these immigrants that are coming from Western Europe over to the United States and stuff like that have a lot of the same trauma responses to atrocities that were happening at the same time. So it's interesting that like you're choosing these stories that are based in reality, that are based in real responses to real tragedies in the world. And I hadn't made that connection until you just said it a moment ago.
yeah. I mean, I think so. Any kind of noir comes from trauma response. It has
Mm,
to. Um, the genre is so deeply rooted in that post World War II anxiety that you there's
mm,
just it's just impossible to separate the that trauma response from any sort of noir. And it's just a question of where you pin that, and then what unfurls from where you pin the trauma.
mhm. Well, and it's very cool to see the direction that you're taking these different things. So, I mean, you can tell that the stories are personal to you in ways, and you can tell that you're actually getting into the heads of these people and going, okay, these are the terrible things that happened. This is the choice that they made. They could have made this choice, and everything would have been different, but this is the direction that they went, and how everything just kind of weaves together. It's really been fascinating to watch these different stories that you've been writing, and how all that comes together, and just how the loose ends of kind of the human emotional psyche can be woven and pulled and stretched without breaking.
Thank you. That's the goal. And I think that's where I as a writer thrive is, really character. Um, I'm not the person who's got, the conspiracy board out trying to weave mysteries.
Mhm,
I've never been that person. Occasionally I have a surprise or a twist for you, but
mhm,
it's less about, weaving the mystery and more about following the emotional and motivational thread of the characters. And even if you know who done it, uh, hopefully you're still invested, right?
yeah, well, I mean, because at a certain point in Nottingham, it's like, who's wearing the mask? Well, we know who's wearing the mask, but like,
Yeah.
it started out as this like mystery. It turns out not to be such a mystery after all. But just even thinking about it and having to go through and figure out what's happening and why it's happening, points stronger towards who it ends up being. But it's still it's like one of those best kept secret things where everybody knows, but they don't quite know. It kind of, yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the Mad Cave Talent Search. So you like to hang out in the character driven parts of stories. Like what uh, just general advice would you give to a writer who's submitting this year?
um I think ultimately you have to look at the property that you're, and this is sort of a lesson both generally for writing work for hire and also more specifically for submitting to the talent search, because it's this sort of the challenge is the same, right? When you're playing with other people's toys and you want to impress them, the idea is to find the thread, the things that you think that they love in the story, and
Mhm.
find what you can bring personally to the things that they love in that story. Um, and balancing those two is really the task that you're given. Um, so, you know, say for example, Battle Cats.
Mhm.
Finding what in Battle Cats that Mark London loves about Battle Cats is your first step in sort of deciphering what you can bring to that property, right?
Mhm.
Um, because ultimately, that's the person you're trying to impress. If you're trying to impress the publisher, you're trying to impress the people who are putting out these books, who have poured their
Mhm.
heart into these books. Um, so Battle Cats is a big epic fantasy story about honor and friendship, um, and legacy, and um, you
Anthropomorphic
can if you
kitties.
can yes, the anthropomorphic cats are neither here nor there. It's you find that what the core of the story is, and you say, all right, well, what do I have to say about that? What parts of myself can I bring to this? Um, and I'll let you in on the story that I wrote, which I've been told I'm not allowed to post. So
But you can talk about, so we're staying within the guidelines here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, because I'm not allowed to post it because there's no one way to sort of approach these things.
Mhm.
But I wrote a story where I murdered all the battle cats. And it wasn't about murdering them. It was, I did this sort of like emotional, almost like whatever happened to the man of tomorrow kind of take,
Oh,
and
yeah.
a little bit old man Logan, that sort of like I was tipping my hat to everything that Mark had done, and then sort of trying to find the thing that really I could pull on. And so you had your protagonist was the only sort of one who survived out of that whole cast of characters, and he has to carry the burden and legacy of all of his friends who had passed, and bring that forward and try to sort of forge a new. um
Well, that also kinda sounds a little bit like the, what is it? The Last Ronin.
it's it's a tried and true comic book trope, right?
Huh, yeah.
um but there's an emotionality about it that just works. um and if you find a spot for it, and it can be really magical. And there are things, you know you don't need to be afraid of tropes. It's comic books. Like, you're allowed to be a little kitschy.
Mhm,
And nostalgia is a huge part of making comic books.
mhm,
I'm not afraid to say that. And that's why Nottingham works, for example,
mhm.
is because we get to play with people's expectations of who these characters should be.
Right.
Um, and also, I think recasting the villain as the hero is the most comic book take you could possibly have. So
Well,
don't
and
be afraid of the trope. Just know why you're mobilizing it,
mhm,
and how you mobilizing it makes the story different and meaningful.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, and also have fun with it. Like, that's the thing, right? If you're not having fun with it,
What's
it's
the
not
point?
going to show up in the script, and then the person who's reading it is not going to have fun.
Mm,
So make sure you are having fun,
nice.
and if you are having fun with what you're doing, and you're bringing what you think the creators were having fun doing, bringing those two together is the best way to go.
Nice. And, I didn't wanna interrupt you there, but you said don't be afraid of tropes. Tropes are tropes for a reason, and
Mm.
it's really it's a tool, and the way you use the tropes is really what's important, not that there are tropes, because you cannot open a comic book and look at a single page and not find 3 or 4 tropes on there. It's just that it's the way stories are written, because there are things that resonate with people and resonate with the audience, and those become tropes because they resonate. So, why would you not use the things that have worked in the past, but find new ways to use them?
Absolutely.
All right. So one question that I had too is who's doing the judging? Do you guys have any input when it's your story?
Nope.
Um, none. Do you get to
Nope,
read them
it's
at
all
any
Mad
point?
Cave. It's all Mad Cave's editors, and they're fantastic and very skilled. And with the past talent searches, I've just come in at the end once people have won and
Mhm.
kind of guided them a little bit. So yeah, no, that's all Mad Cave.
Well, I think it would be interesting though, because like, Mark gets to read the Battle Cats ones. Like it's just, I think it would be interesting if you were at least able to like look at the stack and be like, these are the ones I like the most, and then let them go through
I
but
I am
the process
blessed
is what the
to not
process is.
have that task, as much as I enjoy sort of the lifting up other people part of this thing.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I'm more than happy to let somebody else do that part and focus on, sort of doing my own stuff, and helping where I can.
Okay, well, I mean, we talked about the new book coming out. I'm very excited to see the subsequent chapters because now I've read the first one. The thing that really sucks, guys, about getting to read a lot of these comics early and really early, because this one doesn't come out until 2 months away. It's in August. It's available for pre-order right now. You can go to your LCS right now, tell them you want a copy to make sure that you get one in your pull box. Because if they don't know that you want it, they don't order enough. You're gonna have to wait for the second printing. Just tell them you want it. Go in today. Tell them you want Kosher Mafia. It's a fantastic story, but I read it now in June, and I'm not going to be able to read the second chapter until 2 weeks before the first one comes out. And I'm really frustrated that I don't know what happens in chapter two, because it is that good of a story. It is that good. I love noir stories. I love mob stories. This one, it's the Kosher Mafia is contemporary with Al Capone. They were running liquor when Al Capone was running liquor. They were doing racketeering, money laundering, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
They were
it's
the reason
very,
that Vegas is a thing. Like, there's
mhm.
just so much there.
It's
And if I get to do more, there's so much there. And buy the first issue because that's the key determining factor in whether or not I get to do more. So
Well, and I don't know if people really realize that. So final order cutoff is the last day that your shop can order the book to guarantee that you're going to get a copy. The numbers that come out ahead of final order cutoff determine the print run for the subsequent issues, because however many they sell for the first run or whatever, they're going to do a percentage of that or whatever for the second issue and the third issue and the fourth issue, whatever. So it really determines how many get made, and then whether the story continues beyond the first planned five or six or whatever it is. So those first orders are really, really important. So I would encourage you, it's a fantastic book. I would encourage you to go to your local shop and order Kosher Mafia, so that your local shop knows that it's a thing. They're going to order more than what, the people that come in for pre-orders. They're going to, every shop does it differently, but sometimes they do 2 times, 3 times, whatever the pre-orders they get to put those on the shelves. But it's really important that you let them know that you want Kosher Mafia. It's a fantastic book. It's a great looking book. David Hazan, Sammy Cavella, Ellie Wright, Simon Boland are all doing great work on this book, and I highly recommend it. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off here, David?
yeah, just that it would mean a lot if you would take a chance on another David Hazan special, this time with Sammy Cavella, who I think really, I'm still surprised that the big two work hasn't come for Sammy, and I hope it does very soon because I mean, you look at some of the characters that he's
Mhm.
put in Kosher Mafia, and you're like, oh, like a few tweaks, and that person is just James Bond. Like, I'm surprised that the license work hasn't come harder for him.
It's a
And I'm
great looking
forever
book.
grateful that he said yes because
Well, and
he's
then
fantastic.
Ellie Wright's work on the
Ellie's
art,
lovely.
it fits really well. There's kind of a sepia tone to everything that kind of gives it an age without going too overboard, because the colors and still the colors and things still come through. It's not just like shades of brown like some people do. It's got that, like an old photograph where you can see the greens and blues and things, but it's kind of got the filter over it, and it is a great looking book. I am very, very pleased. I'm going to get a physical copy of it because I want to get them. I mean, it's yeah. I can't say enough how much I love this book. So,
I
uh,
mean, I feel like personally it's right up your alley, like
mhm.
uh I when I sent you the email, I'm like, oh, he's gonna love this.
All right. My name is Brendan Allen. This is David Hazan. Kosher Mafia comes out on August 7th. Get down to your local shop. Tell them you want it. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.